Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Iris Tao in for Tiffany. Our top story, a Christmas message from President-elect Trump accusing Chinese soldiers of illegally operating the Panama Canal. More on the canal's importance to the U.S. and China's influence over it. A classical Chinese dance company Shen Yun kicking off its 2025 world tour, undeterred after receiving threats to its Atlanta performances. President-elect Trump's transition team reportedly preparing to withdraw the U.S. from the World Health Organization. Trump has repeatedly called the W.H.O. a puppet of Beijing. And how could American investment go toward advancing the Chinese military? The key U.S. investments into Chinese companies.
And they turn around and spend those investment dollars into advancing the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, and defense industrial base in China towards weapons and systems that are going to one day be used to kill American soldiers.
President-elect Trump sending a Christmas message to Chinese soldiers. On Wednesday, posting on Truth Social, accusing Chinese soldiers of illegally operating the Panama Canal. He also accused China of, quote, always making certain that the United States puts in billions of dollars in repair money, but will have absolutely nothing to say about anything. Why is the Panama Canal so important? It cuts ships' transit time between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, thereby saving fuel and costs. Trump's post comes after he threatened to take back the Panama Canal over the weekend. Take a listen.
Because we're being ripped off at the Panama Canal like we're being ripped off everywhere else.
Trump also warned that he would not let the canal fall into, quote, the wrong hands.
It was solely for Panama to manage and not for China or any other country to manage. You see what's going on?
Panama's president has said China had no influence on the canal's administration. China is the canal's second largest user behind the U.S., and Beijing has been expanding its influence there by investing in Panama's mining rights and infrastructure and creating Spanish-language media outlets that function as mouthpieces for the Chinese regime. A Hong Kong-based firm also gained control of 2 out of 5 ports surrounding the canal. In 2017, Panama switched its diplomatic relations from Taiwan to the Chinese Communist Party. A year later, it joined China's Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese Communist Party used the project to grow its overseas influence, largely by investing in other countries' infrastructure. Beijing may also lease that infrastructure if the countries can't repay their Chinese loans. U.S. military leaders have expressed concerns about Chinese projects along the canal, and that's because Chinese firms are subject to CCP control. And Craig Fuller, CEO at FreightWaves, also pointed out other concerns, that China might embed surveillance technology within the canal's infrastructure. That technology could be used to monitor U.S. military and commercial movements. In a separate post, Trump appointed Kevin Marino Cabrera to serve as ambassador to Panama. Cabrera is currently a Miami-Dade County Commissioner for Florida's District 6. As the new year approaches, a show Beijing doesn't want you to see is now in full swing. The world's premier classical Chinese dance company Shen Yun touring 4 U.S. cities on Thursday: Atlanta, Houston, Austin, and San Jose. This marks the beginning of the 800 shows that the company will perform in the 2025 season. The company is staying undeterred after receiving a major threat of violence last week in Atlanta. Shen Yun says the Chinese Communist Party has tried to sabotage its performances more than 130 times. The company's records detail how the regime has pressured local elected officials, threatened theater managers, made bomb threats, and even slashed the tires of Shen Yun buses. Despite those threats, for Shen Yun, the show must go on. The company says its mission is to revive traditional Chinese culture, a heritage almost destroyed by the Chinese Communist regime. And President-elect Trump's transition team is reportedly laying the groundwork for the U.S. to withdraw from the World Health Organization on the first day of his second term. It comes amid Trump's long-standing criticism of the UN health agency.
A Reuters source says Donald Trump's presidential transition team is preparing for the U.S. to withdraw from the World Health Organization. The source, a health law expert familiar with the discussions, says it could happen as early as the first day of his new term in January. The Financial Times was the first to report the plan. Trump's transition team did not immediately respond to a Reuters request for comment. The move would align with Trump's long-standing criticism of the UN Health Agency. It would also significantly shift U.S. global health policy and isolate Washington from international pandemic efforts. Trump has already signaled a shift towards domestic health priorities. He's nominated WHO skeptics for top public health roles, including vaccine critic Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Trump's initial attempt to lead the WHO in 2020 was reversed by President Joe Biden, who rejoined the organization. The president-elect has argued that the agency failed to hold China accountable for the early spread of COVID-19. He's also repeatedly called the WHO a puppet of Beijing and vowed to redirect U.S. contributions to domestic health initiatives.
They're literally a pipe organ for China. That's the way I view it. So we're seeing and we're looking and we're watching.
A WHO spokesperson declined to comment directly, but referred Reuters to comments by Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus at a December 10th press briefing. He responded to questions about a U.S. withdrawal under the upcoming Trump White House.
We're ready to work together, and I believe, the U.S. leaders understand that, the U.S. cannot be safe unless the rest of the world is safe.
And Chinese markets could be attractive for American investors, but U.S. investments into China could be arming the CCP's weapons and systems of war. NDD Steve Land sat down with Brian Kavanaugh to discuss. He's a senior vice president at American Global Strategies and former special assistant to the president for national security affairs.
Brian Kavanaugh, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Steve, thank you very much for having me today.
It's great to have you back, Brian. Congress considering a number of China-related provisions in the continuing resolution, which isn't looking too promising right now. We'll see. That's a different story. We'll see what winds up ending in there. But as it stands right now, there are measures in there that the CCP likely won't be happy with. What are some of these? And talk to us how the CCP might react.
I think the one that's most notable in the CR package, that 1,500-page package, is the COINS Act, which is a Chinese Outbound Investments Restrictions Act. Basically, this China Select Committee worked really hard at understanding some of the problems we're having, and some of the things that Representative Molinar, who's the chair of that committee, has come back with, has said, we have taken some really proactive steps to get the Federal Thrift Savings Plan investments out of Chinese companies. There's a lot of Chinese companies that are still on the, that are freely traded within the United States, and we send investment dollars to. And they turn around and spend those investment dollars into advancing the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, and defense industrial base in China towards weapons and systems that are going to one day be used to kill American soldiers.
You've written extensively, Brian, about how American investments have historically fueled China's economic growth and tech advancements. How is the United States currently contributing to Beijing's ambitions, despite China's stated goal to supplant the United States?
We are actively, on the investment front, America is about making a profit. A lot of the times you're always looking to how you can take your dollar and have that dollar grow with as little work as possible in between A and B. Well, through a variable means, the Chinese markets often look very attractive for American investors. That's usually a smoke and mirrors shell game that the Chinese are playing. But at the end of the day, we still continue to put money in that. You have BlackRock and other large equity firms that are managing massive portfolios and indexes. Within these indexes, hiding numerous Chinese companies that do weapons research, intelligence data collection and data analysis. Basically, the defense industrial base at large in China is all being funded out of these index funds. And I pick on BlackRock because that was the one that's been most notably pointed out through all the congressional hearings.
That's actually related to my next question. There's probably a lot of viewers that unwittingly or don't even realize, you mentioned BlackRock and other retirement accounts that are being managed out there that are invested in Chinese firms involved actually in egregious human rights abuses, espionage activities against the United States. What more, you touched upon a few, can the United States do to curb investments in these sectors?
So I think what you're seeing with Congress taking action is really the first step. And it's really been phenomenal to see the last 6 or 7 years the advancement of the United States, the average American's understanding of the threat of China, I'd say we've come a long way in less than a decade in terms of the education front and having a mass public that understands the threat. I think by taking this action, you're not going to get pushback from the United States. And in fact, you're going to find opportunities to invest in companies that are doing things in the United States. You're going to find opportunities to invest in companies that are in allied nations and partner nations. To me, I see only upside here. And meanwhile, you're getting your investments, you're draining the Chinese Communist Party, which is struggling financially anyway already. You're just going to help expedite that. At the same time, you're reducing your risk. At the state level, you see a couple of states were invested pretty heavily in Russia prior to their invasion in Ukraine. And when the United States and other global partners put sanctions in place, we're talking several $100 million disappeared overnight. So as a fiduciary agent, do you really want to be responsible for having the risk of having billions of dollars tied in Chinese markets that if we were to actually go to some kind of warm conflict, or if China were to invade Taiwan, the United States would sanction that and those investments would disappear overnight?
Brian, lastly, you alluded to the fact, oftentimes this is something we've been highlighting a lot with our China experts, is the CCP's use of proxies. When we hear the term proxy, we think Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah. But as you mentioned, the CCP is actually the master at using proxies. Talk to us about how they manipulate this and how it relates to transnational repression on U.S. soil.
That's a great question, and it's something that it's right in front of your face and you don't see it. So when you look at the proxies, the United Front is a massive proxy. It's actually the #1 weapon. Chairman Xi has highlighted it as his favorite tool because people don't realize what it is.
What is it?
So the United Front is this relationship building arm that is out, goes by many different names, it has many different institutions it incorporates.
All benevolently named.
Oh, absolutely. Everything here is in the best interest of building partnerships and collaborating with interested international parties. Really what you're talking about here is a front for them to have access into your country. You see it on college campuses. And this, again, I always go back to that, it's not the Chinese people that are the problem. It is the Chinese government. It's the Chinese Communist Party is the problem. You can have a Chinese national here studying who is not part of the problem, but they are under foot and watch of the United Front. They have students there that are intentionally there as spies to watch all the other Chinese nationals that are there and make sure they're doing things that would be favorable for the party and not for individual growth and intellect. You see that with the police stations in New York. I think we just had the gentleman plead guilty, was that yesterday, to the charges of running illegally running a law enforcement entity for the Chinese Communist Party out of New York.
Brian Kavanaugh, really fascinating. Thank you so much.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for having me.
Coming up, Texas charging a Chinese national. She's accused of selling machines used to make counterfeit drug pills, like those laced with fentanyl. In Canada, warning its citizens about traveling to China, the risk getting banned from leaving China without reason. And Chinese nationals building a factory for BYD, a major Chinese EV manufacturer. Details on what was described as their slavery-like working conditions. That and more after the break here on China in Focus. A Chinese national charged for allegedly selling equipment to press pills. Criminals can use the equipment to make counterfeit drugs. According to the Justice Department, that includes those laced with fentanyl. The Chinese woman's name is Chen Xiaofei. Federal agents arrested her 2 months ago in Las Vegas. If convicted, Chen faces up to 4 years in prison. The case comes as the U.S. government ramps up its efforts to crack down on fentanyl. President-elect Trump has also vowed to protect Americans from the lethal drug. Fentanyl overdose is the leading cause of death among Americans ages 18 to 49. Heading north to Canada, the country pushed back against China earlier this week over human rights. Plus, a look at the travel advisories Canada is sending out to its citizens.
The Canadian government condemned the Chinese regime for taking steps against Canadian organizations and individuals involved in human rights issues. The Chinese Communist regime announced asset freezes and entry bans for those working to help Uyghurs and Tibetans in China. The targets of the ban are 2 Canadian groups and 20 people. Rights groups accuse Beijing of widespread abuses of Uyghur minorities, including the mass use of forced labor in camps. And international human rights groups and exiles have routinely condemned what they call China's oppressive rule in Tibetan areas. The Canadian government, in a statement, expressed solidarity with the targeted organization and said it condemns the decision to punish them for speaking out about human rights. The statement also urged Canadians in China to be extremely cautious.
The Canadian Foreign Ministry has warned its citizens who travel to Xinjiang and Tibet regions to, quote, exercise caution due to increased scrutiny on foreigners. The Canadian government also noted that its ability to provide consular support in Tibet is limited. China approved the plan to build the world's largest hydropower dam in Tibet on Wednesday. The announcement sparked deep concerns among downstream countries, including India.
The Chinese regime hopes to produce enormous amounts of electricity with the dam as the river flows through the largest land canyon on Earth. China's state-run newspaper Xinhua said the dam will be located in the lower reaches of a river that originates in Tibet and flows into India and to Bangladesh, as you just heard. Both countries are concerned about that because a lot of people are relying on it for their water source. Now, the project is located in an earthquake-prone area. Chinese experts are warning that the project could trigger more landslides. Very concerning there.
Over the past decades, China has sought to build a number of dams in Tibet. In February, a large group of local Tibetans protested against the dam project, saying it would flood 6 Buddhist monasteries and destroy artworks dating back to at least the 16th century. China's electric vehicle industry is starting to feel the impact of the European Union's tariffs. Last month, the value of Chinese EV exports dropped by 42% globally compared to the same month a year ago. Export values refers to the value of goods exported to a foreign country. It's a combination of volume and prices. This October, the EU hiked its tariffs by almost 50% on Chinese EVs. The move sought to punish Beijing for subsidizing Chinese EV manufacturers so their vehicles could be sold at much lower prices. The EU accounts for almost a quarter of Chinese EV export values. Since then, both the volume and prices of Chinese EV exports have dropped. Is it made in China or made in South America? More than 100 Chinese workers have been found working in Brazil under extremely poor conditions. They were sent to South America to work for a Chinese EV maker, BYD.
Brazilian officials found 163 Chinese nationals working in what they described as slavery-like conditions. They were building a factory for Chinese electric vehicle producer BYD in northeastern Brazil. According to authorities, the workers were hired in China by an undisclosed firm and brought to Brazil. They were working for hours in excess of those allowed by Brazilian law, sometimes for 7 days a week. A Brazilian labor inspector said the workers had to request permission to leave their housing, and at least 107 of them also had their passports withheld by their employer. Conditions at the work site were also dangerous. The inspector described them as slave-like conditions. In a statement, BYD said it has cut ties with the firm that hired the workers and that it is collaborating with authorities. The investigation is still active, and authorities have yet to issue any fines.
And in South Korea, suspended President Yoon Suk-yeol did not respond to a second summons on Wednesday related to his short-lived martial law decree.
South Korea's suspended President Yoon Suk-yeol did not respond to a second summons today related to his short-lived martial law decree. It comes after ignoring the first summons last week. Local news reported that investigators said they would continue waiting for Yoon, adding they would need to review the case further before seeking an arrest warrant. Yoon's defiance of the summons and failures to appear for questioning have riled opposition lawmakers, saying he should be arrested over concerns of potential destruction of evidence. Yoon was impeached by Parliament on December 14th over his martial law decree and must now face a trial on whether to remove him from office or restore his presidential powers. A friend of Yoon has said Yoon is willing to present his views in person during legal proceedings.
The acting president is also facing the same problem. Han Duck-soo, the prime minister, became acting president after Yoon was impeached. Now the opposition party filed an impeachment motion against him too, blaming him for not appointing justices to the Constitutional Court. A vote is planned for Friday. An American company may have unintentionally played a significant role in South Korea's political turmoil. Let's take a look.
저는 When South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol surprised the country by declaring martial law, he gave particular reasons in justifying why he'd done it. He cited claims of election hacking and anti-state forces that he claimed were North Korean sympathizers. That all sounded familiar to YouTuber Ko Sung-kook, who frequently makes similar claims to his 1.1 million subscribers. His content often aligns with far-right narratives, including claims of election fraud and accusations against political opponents.
YouTube covers everything from left to right, from conservatives to progressives. I think in that regard, the media of the 20th century, known as legacy media, are not communicating public sentiment accurately.
YouTuber Ko says he isn't sure if Yoon watches his channel, though he was hopeful.
If President Yoon Suk-yeol listens closely to the voices of YouTubers, he may understand what the people really think, what the public sentiment of the president's supporters are. That's what I'm expecting.
South Koreans turn to YouTube for news, far more than the global average. 53% of South Koreans use it for news, up from 24% in 2016, according to the Korea Press Foundation last year. Critics say Yoon has been drawn to right-wing, anti-establishment media, and uses language popular among far-right YouTubers. In 2022, he invited right-wing YouTube activists to his inauguration and appointed a YouTuber who spread claims about Chinese communist influence in politics to lead the Public Servant Training Agency. Sociology professor Shen Yun says Yoon's recent language, especially in his martial law declaration, closely mirrors far-right rhetoric.
The language that President Yoon has used for the past 2.5 years, and most of all in his recent declaration of emergency martial law and the decree, appears to be almost identical to what the far-right people use, according to my research.
A 2018 survey by Chosun Ilbo found that 70% of participants in the far-right rallies relied on YouTube as their main news source.
A gesture from China aiming to deepen trade relations with Australia. On Thursday, China lifted all of its high tariffs on Australian exports.
China's Commerce Ministry said that the country has resumed regular quarantine inspections for lobsters imported from Australia. In late 2020, China imposed unofficial bans and tariffs on Australian goods valued at $12 billion, including coal, wine, and rock lobster. That came after Canberra called for an inquiry into the origins of COVID-19. The resumption of Australian lobster imports marks the end of all Chinese-imposed trade barriers on Australian exports.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Iris Tao. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. From round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.